Hey, welcome everyone to yet
Hi,
another
hi.
episode 4 of the Beyond Compliance podcast. I'm Margaret Rose, and today we have Vaughn Rondon, Trisha Chin. We're here serving you all with what I think is going to be a very, very interesting podcast, particularly for those of us in Trinidad and Tobago, and hopefully those of us in Jamaica as well. We want to welcome to Beyond Compliance, Mr. Dwayne Bailey, one of our partners in Jamaica. Mr. Dwayne Bailey, he's the Vice President Procurement of the Port Authority in Jamaica. He is a seasoned procurement professional with approximately 20 years of experience. He is also the founder of Procurement Pulse, where he provides training, consulting, and he has a brilliant podcast as well, focused in on the Jamaica and wider region, talking all things procurement just like us. And we will have all the details as to how the links as to how it should be on the screen. We're recording now, so I'm not seeing it, but by the time you see it, it will be on the screen when we're talking about this and under his name. And very excitingly, he is a published author. He wrote The Winning Bid: Steps to Developing a Successful Tender Response. And Dwayne really comes with loads of experience about the Jamaican system, and we are excited to have a conversation with him today where we talk about the Jamaica public procurement system, and we get the practitioner's view. All right. Now, one of the reasons we were excited and we discussed having this podcast is because Jamaica has been singular in the region when it comes to public procurement reform. Jamaica was the first Caribbean country to undertake modern public procurement reform since early 80s. And they've had their contracted general system that we're going to learn a little about. And they've done some it, recent changes as well. So they are very unique in the region. They've been leaders in the region. And so we're really pleased to welcome you, Dwayne, to this
Thank you.
podcast. How are you?
I am wonderful. I am wonderful. I need to save that intro so wherever I go, and I need to introduce, I can use that intro.
Yeah. But I mean, big up to Dwayne. Pleasure meeting you as well. I met you in April last year,
Mhm.
where we were both participating in the conference put on by the
Elevate conference. Mhm.
Ministry of Finance Jamaica, Elevate Procurement.
Yeah.
And we recognized that we shared vision. We had a shared vision for procurement in the region
Yeah.
and for creating deeper bonds between what we were trying to do here in Trinidad and in Jamaica. So maybe we could start off, and I'm trying not to dominate this
Yeah.
podcast, right? So I am not going to be asking all the questions. So maybe Vaughn, you want to kick it off?
Yeah. Well, I
Uh,
mean, I don't know if your screens could be switched, all practitioners one side, all lawyers one side. You could, yeah.
Practitioners versus lawyer.
Yeah.
but where Trisha will be, because she's in
Yeah.
the middle. She's a lawyer
Well,
and a
yeah.
practitioner.
Yeah. So she could be
What are we
in the
going to do
middle.
there?
I got a split screen. I have a split
You
screen.
just trim you.
I'm not so good at this tech, eh? So I'll help you
That's
with
all
that
right.
one.
That's all right.
Yeah. But
No, I
guys, we
think,
really have two lawyers in the room and
yeah,
two
two
seasoned
practitioners.
practitioners, and we kind of diagonal. Okay,
Yeah.
guys, it's diagonal. Okay.
Yeah.
Move
Okay,
on.
I think from on my end, I just wanted to understand what does the Jamaica model give, especially on the area of the pre-qualification for suppliers and that whole separate company that they have. So that is my concern. And as we go along, just to really understand what are the similarities and what we can expect. I mean, if Jamaica was the first, and we should be following closely behind with any sort of changes that they have, because they have done the lessons learned. Yeah. So that's what I'm looking forward to. From the podcast. Yeah.
And Trisha?
Well, I would like to hear more. Sorry, Dwayne. I feel like we're putting a lot on you, you know. We put you on this pedestal and we are throwing our questions at you.
All on
Um,
him.
But
I
good
would,
thing we're not sitting around a table where the three of you are on one side and I'm on the other side.
Yeah, we interview. I interview.
Yeah.
yes. So the principle of proportionality in the Jamaican public procurement system, that is something that I read about recently. And I don't know if you could let us know how it applies practically in the system.
Mhm, mhm.
Trisha, the man
Proportionality.
is not a lawyer.
Yeah.
That's a legal question. That's a
Yes.
purely. Dwayne, you
It's
know about the
it's
principle of
it's
proportionality in the Jamaican system?
I don't know. I don't know.
That's
I
a
don't know.
legal principle,
Oh my
Trisha.
God. I'm sorry.
No,
So,
we're not
so
going to do that.
Trisha,
Yeah.
say it in the use your procurement voice now.
oh
I'll,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll use my procurement voice now.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I know you are a practitioner for many years. I do have a colleague in Jamaica, and he was telling me that their qualification, they're not so SIPS oriented there. So if you could just let us know what sort of training you all prefer or use
What
or
would be the benchmark
gold
for training?
standard. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe.
gold
Yeah.
Okay,
standard.
okay, okay.
So
So from a training perspective,
Yeah,
in
Right.
terms of qualifying to become a professional, a practitioner in Jamaica.
yeah,
But not
Okay.
right now, but not for
yeah.
this. Okay, so these are what they're interested in. But I'm thinking of the listener or the viewer coming in right now and they know nothing about the Jamaica public procurement system.
Yeah.
I think let's start like what was the Jamaican public procurement system when you all set up this contractor general system? What was that like, and what are the new changes that have been brought? So if you could give us a little bit of the history so that a viewer coming in can get a good understanding
Yeah,
of the Jamaica system, then we will go into the details. Yeah.
yeah.
So the procurement system way back before I was a practitioner and
Mhm.
working in the public service, the system was I would just let's say I needed to do some repairs somewhere. I would have gone there, called the contractor that I intend to do the repairs with, because they're in the area and we have done business with them before. Do the inspections, write up the bill of quantities, send it to them, ask them to write the quote and send it back to me. They send it back to me. And if it is within what I had thought the price should have been, then I hire them, move on.
This is in the public sector.
Yeah,
Public sector. But
Okay.
this was years ago.
yeah.
Years ago. Lot of years ago. Now, where it changed, couple of things changed when the guidelines, the first sets of guidelines became effective, and though they were there, not a lot of persons were using them because procurement was seen as an administrative task, a back office type activity where it doesn't require much brain power to call somebody and say, give me a quote, and then you put it together and move on from there.
They still think it's that.
Yeah,
I know.
Plenty
And
of people still think it's that. And they think the law is just a little obstacle to
yeah,
just getting
a
right.
hindrance,
yeah.
yeah, a huge hindrance
Yeah.
development and everything. It is still spoken of in that light. So I like to tell people that we haven't transitioned from that mindset to where we are now, which is a little sad, but also I like to say procurement is still a relatively new profession on the scene. So it is going to take some getting used to and learning and understanding. Now, where things changed a little, the contractor general became so the contractor general was there, but I think Jamaica really became aware of the contractor general when Greg Christie was at the helm of it.
So
And
hold on a
he's
minute, because I really want to ensure that the viewers are understanding what the system was. Before the contractor general system was set up, I mean, every public sector body could have done their own procurement. Was it decentralized, or did you have a central tendering system?
so historically Jamaica moved from way back in the days, probably before I was born or when I was a toddler, where there was a centralized purchasing area. So all procurement was centralized across government. Then they moved to a decentralized system. So Jamaica, I think, is large and in part decentralized. We're now just trying to put back some amount of centralization in it at some strategic points.
Right.
Yes.
So the guidelines started to lay out a framework for persons to follow.
Okay.
Um, so and then there was the policy office where it wasn't really an office; it was just a couple persons in the Ministry of Finance that was kind of steering the ship.
Right.
Then they started to build out what would eventually become what Jamaican call PAPU, which was the Public Procurement Policy Office.
Yeah.
And then that is where we started to have real reform in the sector, where we introduced a full suite of you call it now guidelines. We had 4 volumes of it, 4 volumes of guidelines at the time. We introduced several standard bidding documents in the same breath,
Well,
where
the contractor general system was set up in the early 80s or so.
yeah.
Right. So this is around the time you're talking about.
So I moved from the early 80s coming into the 90s, coming into the 2000s, because there were different
Contractor
bands
general.
of development that took place
Right.
over time.
Mhm.
So when the policy office came into being, the
Right.
Contractor General Act was still very much in place, but the policy office provided the policy directive against which the Contractor General would now pay keen attention. So the Contractor General was originally only looking at procurement contracts and acts of corruption or mismanagement of procurement, etc.
Right. So it was an
So
oversight body.
right now, with that, there the other element also came into being fully. I'm not sure exactly where it came into being, but it was a subset of the Contractor General's office,
Mhm.
which was then the National Contracts Commission, and that
Mhm.
is where suppliers would go to be registered as government contractors
Mhm.
for certain goods and services over a certain value.
Right.
So if you want to do business with the government, well, no, and it is over $1.5 million, then you would need to be registered with what is now called the Public Procurement Commission, but then it was the National Contracts Commission,
Contract commission.
NCC.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, the
And
NCC at the time, so we're now at 1.5 million
Jamaican.
Jamaican.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Back then, we're at 250,000
Okay.
Jamaican.
Jamaica. And then we move to and then of course the threshold for single source, because it was linked to that threshold, it moved
Right.
the from the 250 to 275,000. Then
Mhm.
it moved to 500,000. Then it moved now to 1.5. And we have now split and say if it's goods and services, it's 1.5 million.
Mhm.
But if it's works, it's 2 million. So
Okay.
above 2 million, you must be registered with the Public Procurement Commission if you want to do business with the government in
Mhm.
Jamaica.
Mhm.
Um, so the guidelines ran for quite some times, and we operated on circulars, which are instructions issued from the policy office out of the Ministry of Finance. And whenever they wanted to make changes to the threshold or they wanted to introduce anything specific, for example, there was a circular that spoke to how evaluation committees were to be constituted. There's a circular that spoke to how the rules behind issuing a purchase order and receiving goods, as example. As a matter of fact, those two circulars, though there is the law and everything now, they are still very relevant even today.
Okay.
So we do have circulars from back then that is still relevant today to how a lot of places still conduct business. Fast forward to 2015, I believe, 2014, 15, thereabout, when we introduced the electronic government procurement portal
Right.
in a test phase. And we started to test bringing procurement electronic. But of course, not a lot of persons were using it. Then so the pilot ran for a couple of years, and you realize that there are things that you could do on it, and I mean it's useful. Then simultaneously with that, in 2015, the act the act the act was approved,
Mhm.
but it didn't become effective until 2019.
Mhm.
And there
New
was
Public Procurement Act.
the Public Procurement Act,
Yeah,
right?
of
And then
Jamaica.
there was an amendment in 2018 to that act.
Right.
Um, and then from that act, we have different regulations that came. So the regulations came in 2018 also. There's the regulations that speaks to a supplier's right to reconsideration and review.
Nice.
Um,
But and then that goes to what body? They have a right to reconsideration and review.
so there should be a reconsideration and review board, which is separate from all the bodies that we talk about
Yeah.
so far.
Have
I
you all set it up?
Last time I checked, there wasn't a board set up as
Yeah.
yet. However, not a lot of suppliers complain to the point where it would have gotten to the board. However, again, it may be a case of lack of information. They may not know that they have that right.
That right. But
Also,
but right there, because you're now talking about some exciting stuff. Not that everything else wasn't exciting, but that right of reconsideration and review, um, it's to go back to the procuring entity to have them reconsider and review, because you said the board isn't set up.
yeah.
So tell
So
us
if
a little bit about that.
so, the reconsideration review, it's an entire process, which starts with the procuring entity. So currently, so one of the gaps that was in the system before that, there was nobody that was written in law that could stop a procurement.
Interesting. Yeah.
So there wasn't anything to say, if the supplier raises a concern here, you have to stop the procurement.
Right.
Currently, the reconsideration and review allows that to happen, where the process has to stop until it is resolved. But the process can start from standstill. Now, there was nothing about a standstill in our previous practice. Now, with the institution of a standstill, what I have seen, a lot of suppliers do challenge the award at standstill. And I have seen cases where some awards are reversed when the objection is raised. But then there are other times when the objection is raised and it's
They move forward.
right. So the standstill process could trigger the reconsideration and review process, where you would now submit that formally that you want them to reconsider this under the Reconsideration Act, and that would now start a process with the procurement committee, the head of entity. If they don't respond, it moves to another level, and it keeps going until it gets to the review board, and then the review board will then make a ruling from there about the process itself. But as I said, as far as I'm aware, the review board is not yet in place.
Okay.
So the system as it exists now, how many entities exist in your Jamaica public procurement system in the oversight, monitoring, and review?
Policy, everything. Yeah.
Everything.
So
How many and what are they? And
formal offices, starting from the top. You have the Office of Procurement Policy, which is our main policy office, that they are the ones responsible with all policy oversight, regulations, etc.
right. So law and policy there, Office
Right.
of Procurement Policy. Uh-huh.
They're called the Public Procurement Policy Office, I
Yeah.
think.
That's what I was talking to you all about before. Yeah.
Um, from there are now two arms primarily. There is the watchdog, which is the Integrity Commission, and they are pretty much tasked to monitor compliance. across the spectrum, hold different persons accountable for their actions or inactions. They can they can prosecute. So their act allows them to actually prosecute public servants. Um, that's on, let's say they're on the left.
Before a specialized tribunal or be within the criminal courts?
Within the court. All other bodies would have to go to the director of public prosecution.
But your integrity commission,
But the Integrity Commission can
wow,
take it
and that's
directly to
broader
court.
than public procurement oversight. That's
Yeah.
Yes, so
Yeah.
their mandate
Through the
spans
spectrum.
beyond public procurement. Their mandate spans beyond that. So their mandate covers even declarations that persons have to do right across the spectrum.
and they're allowed to prosecute.
They're anti-corruption body, pretty much.
Yeah.
Excellent. And have they prosecuted public
Yeah,
officials?
they have taken persons to court.
Wow.
Right now there is a matter where I think the Prime Minister was written up in a report, and he's now taking them to court to quash the report
Challenge
that they
it.
wrote.
Yeah.
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 Right.
So
Um,
so their powers go, they can touch pretty much anybody in the country, because they can even go after private sector persons in some regard.
Well, there's a difference, guys, to the
Yeah.
viewers. There lies
A big difference.
between our system and Jamaica. Jamaica seems to be very serious
Yeah.
about stamping out corruption. So they've taken them to court. Have there been successful prosecutions by the Integrity Commission?
Yeah. Even
Yeah.
recently, for example, there
Yeah,
was a MP, I think, that failed to declare in a timely manner his declaration, and they actually took the MP to court and won. And there are several other cases that they would have taken to court. So they
So just not publish the names in the papers and say they didn't submit it. Straight to court. Yeah.
Wow. Well done. Okay, so all right. So we have the Public Procurement Policy Office. We have the Integrity Commission. So
Yeah.
on one side, and then on the other side now you have the PPC. And they're the ones now responsible for registration of suppliers.
Right.
yeah, but
So they-
Public Procurement
They were the
What?
NCC before.
Contractor,
Who they were NCC before, right?
Yeah.
National Contracts Commission before. What is it now? You're
Public
saying
Procurement
PPC,
Commission.
but people
Yeah.
not going to know what that is, Dwayne.
Yeah, PPC.
We've actually had that. They wrote into us after our first episode.
Yeah.
The acronyms. Yeah.
What is that? What is OPIA? What is this? So we are trying now to be very vigilant.
Yeah.
So there's a
Public
public
Procurement Commission,
Commission.
PPC.
right,
Yeah.
which you were talking about, where the suppliers need to register.
Right.
And so what has happened to the contractor general then?
It was morphed into the Integrity Commission.
Mm.
Right.
So, for example, the Integrity Commission, where you had the contractor general, theoretically, you now have several contractor generals
Wow.
under the Integrity Commission, and they're actually referred to as directors. And these directors are appointed by the Governor General.
Mm. So they would be for specific. So like one for procurement, one for finance, one for that.
So, not necessarily. There's a director of investigations.
Okay.
There's a director with the responsibility for legal something. I don't remember all the other directors. And there's one that deals with compliance and construction stuff. So the director of investigations, whenever there is something that requires, so when they're looking at your procurement process, you get something from the office of the director of investigations to say, we want to see this you call it now, this contract, provide us with these sets of information.
Mhm.
And whenever the Integrity Commission writes to you, they are writing to you from a legal context.
Mhm.
So there are times, for example, if they're conducting an investigation, they're sending you documents as though they're the legal persons can say these statements that you have to now sign in the presence of, in Jamaica, justice of the peace, or in some cases a notary public,
Right.
because they're taking statements to say to prevent you from having to come and sit down and do a formal in-camera interview.
Mhm.
Right.
And
Right.
when they write to you, I tell you, it's when the Integrity Commission writes you, it's one of those bodies that nobody wants to delay on sending a response to.
Response.
Wow. Taken seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Taken seriously. Wow. So, okay. So that's the system. What would you say? We've already identified that it's stronger in terms of oversight and enforcement.
Mhm.
What would you say are some of the challenges that you, as a public procurement practitioner within that system, that you experience?
We're too heavy on compliance.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you're actually part of our ethos here, beyond compliance.
Compliance. Yeah.
We need to
Yeah.
understand public procurement beyond compliance.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, we're too heavy on compliance. When we look at even the law, for example, it's as if they lifted up the guidelines that existed
Mhm.
and insert them into the law and just
Yeah.
made those law. And what was meant to be guidelines and instructions to help you to conduct procurement now became the authority and the written rule by which it is supposed to be done.
Mhm.
And it doesn't, well, so they finally did it, Vaughn.
Yeah. 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 Trisha.
You realize the lawyers on one side now and the
Love
procurement
Trisha.
practitioner
Thank you,
on the other
Trisha.
side.
Thank you, Trisha. Yeah.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Jane was making a very big point there, no?
Yeah.
Because that is the point that the three of us have been making in the last few episodes
Yeah.
repeatedly about handbooks and guidelines becoming law
Mhm.
and the challenges. And so Dwayne is actually saying his views that Jamaica is too heavy on compliance because a lot of what they did is that they took some of those circulars and guidelines that existed and they just made it law. That's
Mhm.
what am I understanding you
Yeah,
correct, Dwayne?
Yeah.
yeah.
And oh God, I'm talking too much,
Yeah.
but
Go ahead.
go ahead. So that's one of your challenges, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I know the ministry, the policy office is actively working to issue new guideline, a new handbook, because the old handbooks that we had, so the law doesn't cover every element that the handbooks actually covered.
Mhm.
So there are no instances where when you want to do something that the law doesn't cover, you have to now revert to what is practice. And I think I don't want to speak out of turn with the lawyers, where common law is if there's something that is practice that becomes law eventually.
Yeah.
Our guide to figure out what was the practice is the handbook and the guidelines that existed. So you would always revert to those to say, this is the guiding principle that we used to operate by. So if I should continue to operate in this regard, I should be fine, even though it is not explicitly stated in the law.
Mhm.
But then there are things that the law is not silent on, but it is not explicit enough
Mhm.
to provide you with a way to treat with it, and then that leaves it open to a lot of interpretations.
Right.
And different persons can have their own version of how this should be
Interpretation.
interpreted.
Yeah.
Will you give
Um,
us an example, maybe, of one of those areas? Or you want to keep that on the down low? You don't want anyone to know.
no, I mean, an area that the law doesn't speak to is variation.
Yeah.
So the
Variation.
law doesn't cover variations
Mhm.
at all.
Well, you see, variations, or maybe that might be because variations are part of the contract management period,
Mhm.
right? So the procurement process itself, which resulted in a winning bid, right?
Mhm.
After that, you enter into a contract with the winning bidder. And
Mhm.
the contract is where you will find the governing law relating to variations, right? You want variations in legislation, right?
So that may be fine,
Mm-hmm.
but our practice was there is always something that guides in terms of how variations are done. So even if it's a case where you're not going to write it in the law, there in the regulations that followed, definitely there should have been some reference to it, because we had the practice, for example, if the variation is beyond a certain point, the head of entity would now need to, the head of entity can approve at certain value threshold. Now, yes, those are hardcore guidelines activities, but if you make the guidelines irrelevant by putting in place the law without a supporting guidelines in place, these little nuances, and these are things that are happening every day in every procurement office right across the country. So whenever you want to know how a variation should be treated, the only reference you have is the guidelines, and the guidelines again is you're not sure if you should be using it or if you shouldn't be using it. So we get to the point where we say if it's not in the law, then you revert to the guidelines.
No,
Yeah.
That's
they're
one
track and
example.
trace, so
The other side of it now, the law allows you to do a framework agreement as an example, but the law, how it treats framework agreement, it's not clear. And then how you are expected to be efficient using a framework agreement, the law prohibits it.
Yeah.
For example, a framework agreement would be useful if I'm doing something that I would ordinarily need to go back for multiple approvals or run multiple contracts. I could have approved the framework agreement and then issue my contracts from there. What our law currently says, you can do the framework agreement at any value that you want. Let's say you have to go through two external approval bodies depending on the value. So let's say your framework agreement would have gone to the highest approval. The law doesn't require you to go external to get it approved. What the law requires you to do is every contract that you're going to generate from that framework agreement, you would need to go and get those contracts approved individually,
okay.
which makes it right. And that's what I mean when I say, so there are some nuances in the law, and that creates challenges. So we didn't speak a lot about framework agreement in the guidelines previously, but then the law came and said, well, we're going to framework agreement, and this is how you're going to do it, which just never make any sense.
Yeah.
The other thing is standstill, which is the period of time from when you have a recommended bidder before you are going to actually take an action towards awarding that contract to that bidder. You notify the bidders that, look, we are intended to award this to this bidder. This is what the quote. You have this amount of days within which to submit an objection. During that time, the procurement entity can take no further action towards awarding that contract. Now, conceptually, from a supplier's perspective, that's a nice tool. When the law was originally written, it said, so we have three tiers of approval. Tier one is your internal approval, where your head of entity can approve. Tier two is where the Public Procurement Commission provides the endorsement before the approval. And then tier three, which is the highest value, is where our cabinet infrastructure, the cabinet has to give their approval before the award. When the law was originally written, standstill was not applicable to anything within tier one. It was only applicable to everything tier two or three. Now, in the review, we decided that, hey, it's a good idea. Let's make it applicable to everything.
Yeah.
So it then became applicable to tier one, tier two, tier three. Problem is, tier one activities, when from my understanding of how policies are written, the tier one activities that you allow the procuring entity head to make that decision. These are operational activities, routine enough that to enable business to continue, move fast and still allow some flexibility, but still keeping them within the confines of the rules. When we applied the standstill to it, you then extended the time it takes to conduct a procurement activity and make the process seem far more inefficient than it was already touted to be. Because the minute we started to go law and heavy on the guidelines, we were then told that procurement has become the most inefficient activity to be conducted in government. So those are, I guess, 3 examples of the nuances that came into being. But what the law also did, though, and I don't want it to seem that it was all bad, what the law also did was provide practitioners an avenue to justify why something should not be done in one regard. I think Margaret is muted.
Oh, yeah, I was coughing. So it empowers procurement professionals then. That's one
Yeah.
positive that you see coming out.
Yeah. But so it empowers you, and then it allows, in some cases, persons have more latitude with when they're communicating rules and what is right versus what is wrong, because it is now clear. What used to happen with the guidelines is, because it was guidelines, a lot of persons say, well, it's just a guide, we don't have to follow that.
Right.
Yeah, so when it moved from being a guidelines to the law, especially, and there are nuances in our practice that requires you to be heavy on compliance. So I'm not
Right.
going to behave as though it's all good and everybody is above board. There are instances, I've heard horror stories about political interferences in government. Right now, the law, for example, states that the head of procuring entity has certain responsibilities under the act, the Public Procurement Act. But the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act in Jamaica empowers boards to do certain things that would seemingly make boards the head of procuring entity and not the CEO who the head was potentially intended to have been based on the act. And I have seen entities where that conflict becomes really true, where the board will say the board is the head. And as a matter of fact, even when in our cabinet approval, if the board does not say we have met and approved or we are in favor of this, your submission will be sent back for the board to review before, even if the CEO signed off on it. So then it also kind of gives credence to the fact that the board has that level of oversight responsibility, which is a greater power than what the CEO ultimately has. But there's nothing in the Public Procurement Act that references any responsibility of the board. So nothing in the act says the board has any responsibility to do anything.
Yeah. Wow. That's that's really different. I mean, we have our process here where the board is excluded, and I've seen the approach to them by way of a non-objection, but they don't have that power. Well, it's not a practice that if the board does not agree, it gets sent back. I mean, the law is clear on same. I think even when the board doesn't agree, you try to have that, you know, that education, that information being passed to the board as to the process. You know, so I'm not seeing it from a the board not agreeing based on any sort of, you know, nefarious activity kind of thing. I think they just need to understand all the process and be comfortable with the process that was used. And this is where it's important upfront for us to have that communication with them. Yeah. But yeah, definitely have some I can agree with you on the, you know, the legal aspect and some of the nuances from a procurement context. But I do hope that, you know, with some of the lessons that will have been learned over a period of time. I mean, you all are having the changes. So over the time frame, there is a recognition based on the use of it that the change must happen. So it's exciting spaces to be in. Yeah.
And I'm looking at the time. I mean, I want to talk to you for 2 more hours because to me, we just scratched the surface. So maybe we need to do a spotlight on Jamaica public procurement series.
Yeah, definitely.
Today, we just kind of did an introduction to it. You know, I want to ask you a final question, unless Trisha, you wanted to jump in with a question, but there's one question in my mind, right? Like, you have 20 years experience in what is one of the one of the most progressive. I say one of the most now because Trinidad and Tobago has now really done a significant overhaul of the public procurement system and with our OPR. So I think we are now, you know, very different because we didn't, as Vaughn was saying, follow along with
Yeah.
what Jamaica did. You know, everybody feels they're bright. We all bright. So we all feel we could invent, you know, our, and there are a lot of positives in that, right? Because we all trying to figure this out from the bottom up. We're all very new nations, right? So I want to throw out a challenge to you, a question to you, and I mean, if it's too hard, just say, Margaret, leave me alone. I don't want to
Yes.
answer that. But let's say you are in one operating in one of the most progressive public procurement systems in the region. You over 20 years, well, approximately 20 years of experience. You are a published author. You are a public procurement expert, right? You have wisdom. Let's say there is a new nation being set up, you know, war, bam, 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 you know, and the new slate of leaders have come on to now craft what their governance system is. And they are going to set up a public procurement system that ensures that public money is being spent with appropriate oversight and with a keen eye for best value for money. What are the lessons that you could share with those new leaders who want to create a new public procurement system from scratch? What would you tell them they need to watch out for? And you know, if you could come up with three, that's great. If not, you know, what do you think? What do you think are the most important things that you have learned,
I can
gleaned?
answer that, you know.
So
And
I
then you have the Trinidad. So we'll have the Jamaica perspective on that
Yeah.
question, and then we'll have the Trinidad perspective. But yeah, Dwayne.
No.
so I think I think where Jamaica, where the mindset is the right place. You need an overall body that is looking at policies and regulations that sits at the top of the system. It is a relevant thing to have call it your own auditors, be it an integrity commission, a contractor general, whatever that may look like. And then there has to be a system. I believe there's value in having a system around qualifying persons to become government contractors. So I think those three,
Government contractors, right? Yeah.
are government suppliers, are government vendors, right? And that system doesn't have to be a body necessarily. The policy office could just lay out guiding rules and principles and then create. But because how Jamaica has done it, there's this central point where all of that is managed, etc. I think there is value in that. And then the final thing I would say is all of these body needs to be integrated through technology,
Right.
Mhm.
seamless technology, and the technology should be such that it provides information to everybody at different levels
Mhm.
without having the need for the practitioners to be communicating independently with each of these different persons.
Mhm.
So from the beginning, and that system should be built around the policies that the policy office has put in place, and you can't breach that because it is built directly around that, which then reduces the need for practitioners to be doing a lot of the little routine activities that takes up all their times. Um, so Jamaica has technology, but we so for example, we have the government of Jamaica electronic procurement platform where we publish all our tenders, or we are expected to publish all our tenders above 500,000 up, well, above 500,000, right? Now, one of the things I realized is everybody in the organization does not have access to that system. So it doesn't provide information to the end user who would have made a request of procurement and say, I want to buy something, because they are not interacting with that system. I mean, I had solved that problem by building my own system that solved that problem. But imagine a world where the system is such that it captures even the end user can interact with that system as a requester, and
Yeah.
they are able to track their procurement activity all the way, and everything is done in that system. Even management of contract
Yep.
payments comes through that. Everything comes through that.
Mhm.
So just imagine having a system that links all of that. The ease with which your auditors will be able to audit the process,
Absolutely.
because they wouldn't even need to sit down and be scouring through papers anymore. They could just literally um, send a command and say, pull out all the nuances between here. And with the onset of AI, they could easily write something for the AI to pull out all anomalies that would have taken place.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just imagine if you do an emergency procurement, and every single thing that you're going to do to spend money, if you do it after the fact, it goes on the system. If you do it before the fact, it goes on the system. Regardless, you just know that you'll be skipping a couple steps, and the minute you skip a couple steps, the system automatically asks
Yeah.
you to provide these information, and it is placed in the system in a way that you can now tell the system to read this and see if it makes sense, for
Mhm.
argument's sake. Or you suggest parameters. These are parameters. And if it miss those parameters, you call up the different persons. You will need to be focused so heavily on compliance.
Mhm.
Excellent.
Mhm.
I mean, you are singing and preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because when we were thinking of, reestablishing the Caribbean Procurement Institute and the work that we were doing before, we said, we are in a different moment now where there are a lot of other entities that can do the training. But what we need is we need the expertise to be married with the technology to
Yeah.
create solutions
Mhm.
that ensure we buy better,
Yeah.
right? And that's why we are here, and that's why you are one of our most cherished partners.
Mhm.
And there's more to come in terms of what we'll be doing together. Um, yeah,
Definitely. Yeah.
Trisha, you want me to close up without us hearing your voice a little?
Yeah, I don't know. Trisha is so silent today. Like,
Well, I see Trisha actually wanted to present something on the Jamaica system. If you all want us to continue a little longer, we could do that.
What's to
yeah,
see out there? What you have there, Trisha?
We have
It's
Trisha.
not me present something on the Jamaica system. It's
What
a
is
wrap
it?
up of what Mr. Bailey was saying.
Oh,
So
Okay. Okay.
basically, it's what he was saying. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
excellent. Please go
Yeah.
ahead,
So
Yeah.
Trisha.
yes, so these are just some points we would have taken while we were going through
Right. Mm-hmm.
this podcast with you, Mr. Bailey. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the overview, the players in the system, the Integrity Commission, which you said now includes persons with contractor general powers,
Yeah.
the Office of Procurement Policy, the
Could you do
PPPO.
it as a slideshow? So
Oh, can I do that?
OPP.
yeah, just go to
OPP.
slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay.
OPP.
Okay.
Well, they're actually OPPP. Office
O
of
triple P. I have
Yeah,
it wrong.
Office of
Sorry.
Public Procurement
That's
Policy.
okay. Could you do it as
Okay.
a slideshow though, so that
Yeah,
because
I'm
it's
doing
not
it
that
as a
big
slide.
for us. Mhm.
Yeah. So is it bigger now?
No,
Well, it's still on the
you're
It's
not
still
assessment.
on
So yeah,
the
so
slideshow.
from beginning,
Go to
Okay. I
go to
had it on
slideshow.
from beginning, huh?
we
Let me
slide.
come out of
Yeah,
it.
it
Go
just
Okay.
into slideshow,
So
and then you have to click the first one, right?
yeah, so it's bigger now?
no.
Mm-mm.
No, okay,
Okay,
sorry.
No, all right. Go ahead. Go ahead.
let's go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had the reconsideration and review board, which you said is yet to be established, but
Mm-hmm.
should probably be on the same side as Integrity Commission because
Mm-hmm.
they would be investigating. So I put the investigative powers on one side, which is what I think
You'll
you
be
all want to
adjudicating
do.
as well. Adjudicating.
Yes. Yeah,
Mhm.
practitioners versus lawyers, kind of seems. And then the Public Procurement Commission on the other side, because they are the ones registering the contractors, and they would be in line with the Office of Procurement Policy, the OPPP.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. So
That's
then we continue. It's just 3 slides. Sorry, it's not too
yeah.
long. Your three-tier approval system.
Click
So
on
the
this
Why
slide.
does it come up?
oh, it didn't come up as yet.
Oh,
Oh
or you can
no.
just click on it.
Just click on it.
Okay, let me come out and click
Ah,
Ah,
on.
yeah.
come up. Come up.
So the three-tier approval system. So the first tier approval from your internal procuring officer,
Mm-hmm.
and then depending on the threshold, you go to the higher tiers.
Mm-hmm.
Approval from the Public Procurement Commission, and then the final tier, which is approval from cabinet.
Cabinet, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then everyone's favorite standstill,
That's
which
good.
I think would have come in with that act you mentioned of 2015.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and then of course it allows for the supplier challenge of the process. It originally only applied to tiers 2 and 3, but now
Yeah.
it applies to all of the 3 tiers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I have at the end, because I try to be a little soft sometimes. Um, there's a general understanding that the application to all 3 levels has slowed the system.
Yeah.
It's not a fast and efficient system
Yeah.
anymore.
I,
Yeah.
I can I can add to that. The
Mhm.
former Minister of Finance um, actually said last year that they are looking at a reform for the standstill period.
Oh.
Um,
Mhm.
further discussion with our Chief Procurement Officer, Andre Bennett, he actually said on my podcast that they they're not going to be abolishing standstill, but they're going to be changing the values that it is applied to. So I
Mm-hmm.
think we'll be moving back to a place where it is not applied right across the board to everything, but only to the highest value spend. And even for the Public Procurement Commission, they have recently introduced a monitoring and evaluation of procurement contracts and supplier contracts, which they are now going to be linking to suppliers' ability to re-register as suppliers. So they're looking at ways now to penalize suppliers for bad performance and reward those who perform the best, for
Right.
argument's sake. Through this introduction, the program is called what CCPEP, which is Consultants and Contractors Performance Evaluation program or platform. I don't remember what the other P is, but CPEP.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the major things that is taking place. I mean, in the Jamaican context right
Mm-hmm.
now, just to you know add to that. And the Ministry of Finance, from time to time, they issue guidance notes that provides clarity on specific areas or elements that they want to change or reform, which has replaced the broad circulars that would have come previously.
All right, cool. Guys, looking at time, we have to close up. This has been a really great introduction to your system, and
Yeah.
there a lot of learning that we can take in respect of technology, in respect of the standstill period, in respect of their body integrity commission that does those kinds of enforcement and prosecutions. Um, Dwayne, how can viewers find you? What are your handles, and how can they find Procurement Plus,
Mhm.
Procurement Pulse? How can
So
they
the
find you? Yeah.
so the Procurement Pulse, we're on Instagram, and the handle is literally the Procurement Pulse. Um,
Okay.
we're on TikTok also, and it's the same handle on TikTok, the Procurement Pulse.
Mhm.
We're also on YouTube, and I think on YouTube we're the Procurement Pulse JA.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And they can get your book, the
The
winning
winning bid
the winning bid at Amazon.
on Amazon, yes, it's available on Amazon. And if there are persons in Jamaica who is watching this, there are physical copies available here also.
And the winning bid is geared toward suppliers or geared
So
toward every.
it's geared primarily to suppliers.
Mhm.
Um, Practitioners can benefit from it also. I wrote the winning bid when I was actually operating in the private sector. So
Yeah.
a lot of the content came from when I was operating in the private sector, because when I went there, I realized that as much as I knew about public sector procurement as a practitioner, when I went into the private sector, I learned very quickly that I had sent out a blank document. And then when I was required now to fill out that blank document that was sent to me, it was a challenge. My first bid, I was late and it was
Yeah.
rejected.
Yeah.
Oh no.
That's a lot of experience there, boy. That's yeah.
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 So I learned very quickly that I needed to, and when I started to look for resources to help me, I couldn't find anything from the supplier's perspective. So that the winning bid is really a guide for suppliers. And it's,
Mhm.
though I am a Jamaican practitioner, the winning bid is written not just from a Jamaican perspective, but from a holistic
Yeah.
best practice perspective. So suppliers, wherever you are globally, the winning bid will help you,
Mhm. Mhm.
because it's principles that is laid out, and not a system. So I
Yeah.
didn't lay out the Jamaican system, but a principle of how to submit a bid, how to actually make sure that your bid is competitive.
Mhm.
Um, and then my podcast really now focuses on bringing procurement to the forefront, but with the supplier's perspective in mind.
Okay.
Uh,
Nice.
Excellent.
That
Excellent.
is
so
so. That's
That's
such.
a different perspective that's needed. Yeah. On the side.
yes,
Yeah.
Okay, so I think on behalf of PC Plus, Mr.
Mhm.
Bailey, I'd just like to say thank you so much.
Mhm.
As you can see from the slides that we created while you were speaking, we've
Yeah.
learned so much. Like, I started the system just having vague memories of the contractor general system, but now I feel like I understand the Jamaican system a lot better now,
Mhm.
and I can use that as a platform to go further. And also, I will, of course, buy your book from one author to another. I will support you and buy your book.
I
And
appreciate, and I'll also buy yours for sure.
oh, thank you so much. So, just to say thank you
Just
so
so
much
that
for
people
sharing your
know that Trisha's book is not on procurement, or else we would have plugged it as well. Trisha's book is on indigenous. It's for children. So just plug your book. Just tell
Plug
us
a
what
book. Plug a book.
plug the book.
We wear
my,
many hats. We many hats.
my
Many hats
latest
for
book
procurement plus.
is
Trisha,
an
please tell us what.
indigenous folk tale. Yes, the latest book is an indigenous folk tale, but I tend to write Trinidad folklore and Christmas stories, and
Right.
I'm not procurement at all. So
No,
sorry.
but what you could inject in that some procurement stories that
Yeah,
Yes.
become folklore.
Yeah, yeah.
because those are some folklores wherever you are for sure.
Wherever you are, they are going to be relevant. You know.
Wayne, do you have kids?
I do have a son,
Right, so you can buy Trisha's books
Folklore.
definitely,
because you do
definitely.
children's books. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, Trisha.
Oh yeah, yeah. I do
Yeah.
children's books.
That's
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. for sure.
Mhm.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mr.
Yeah,
Bailey.
definitely.
Dr. Rose, Vaughn, you all want to add in anything before we go?
No,
No,
thanks. I mean, we certainly need to have a follow up where we will
most
target
definitely.
specific areas of the Jamaican system and
Mhm.
drill down deep in that. And you would guide us on that. Good
Mhm.
luck on the Procurement Pulse podcast. We're going to have all your things showing up by
Yeah,
the time this episode airs. And guys, thanks for if you're here
yeah.
right now, 1 hour, right? Thank you. It means that you're interested in what we are sharing. Please, if you're here, still like and subscribe to this video. Um,
Mhm.
Subscribe to our podcast. It helps us a lot. And um, join our online community platform. We have a promotion going on whereby our first 50 members on that online community platform will have free membership
Mhm. And
for a
access.
year.
Yeah.
For a year. All right. So, yeah, see you all next time.
All right.
Thank
All right.
you.
Take care.
Goodbye. All right.